Welcome to the Star Chamber. I'm Ryan Swayze, a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and the founder and president of the Walk the Talk Foundation, a nonprofit that advocates for and advises currently serving and former military service members going through the arduous journey of administrative processes and investigations in our government.
And I am Francescagraham, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Advisor for the Walk the Talk Foundation. For all our returning guests, welcome back. And for our new listeners, thank you for tuning in. Before we begin this week's topic, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button, check out our Walk the Talk Foundation website, and hit that donate button if you think we're doing a good job. Also, check out our newsletter, the DoD Times Redacted, on all the socials, including LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Facebook. Links in the description. All right, Star Chamber listeners, let's get started. Welcome back, Star Chamber listeners, to another great episode of the Star Chamber. Dun, dun, dun. And we are joined today by a phenomenal guest, one of the groundbreakers for women in the military. Karen Vidya Cicchini was born in Altus, Oklahoma in 1958 and is a global citizen. She is a West Point graduate, class of 1980, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, that's the first class that graduated women,
That's
correct? Darn right. The first class that accepted women. She went on to serve in the United States Army for 5 years, serving as a maintenance officer in the Ordnance Corps, achieving the rank of captain. She then served as a maintainability engineer for Martin Marietta for 2 years, doing architecture studies for the future space station. She later graduated from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, with a bachelor's degree in nursing. She has served for 33 years as a holistic nurse, bedside therapeutic musician, and hospital clown. I mean, that's just kind of cool. Vidya has been in full immersion with the American University of Mayonic Science and Technology for 11 years and is a PhD candidate in MST. She serves as assistant to the chancellor and is adjunct facility at the VOS2 Design and Measurement. She is a certified VOS2 consultant level 2 and VOS2 Yantra artist. You're going to have to explain what these are during the program there, Vidya. She has assisted in building over 60 VOS2 structures. She has been meditating for 33 years using various forms of transcending meditation with 5 years practicing Zen Buddhist mindfulness. She is a certified self-recognition mediation teacher, and she lived meditation. Forgive me. Thank you. Not mediation. Fair point. Very different story. And she lives on 55 acres in Alamos, Sonora, Mexico, Rancho de la Soledad, with Dr. Jesse Merkay, 5 equines, 3 poodles, and a dachshund. Dachshund? Dachshund. I always say that incorrectly.
Dachshund.
Dachshund. I said every try I gave incorrectly. Okay, so before we get into the real program, we're going to read our quick disclaimer for all the nasty little Poindexters of the group. The opinions and views expressed by guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not represent the official policies, positions, or endorsements of the United States Army or any other government entity. This discussion is intended for informational purposes only and should not be construed as reflecting the official stance of any military or governmental organization. And if Ryan were here, which he's unfortunately not today because he is working on some family matters and also traveling, then he and I would both say together, suck it, Poindexters. So Karen, could you start by telling us about your time at West Point and what led you to serve as an Army officer in the, again, I just want to point out again for our loyal listeners, the first class that accepted women at West Point?
I entered West Point July the 7th, 1976, with 191 other women and 900 plus other men. And if I'm not mistaken, I may have been the first one to actually report to the man in the red sash.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Yes.
cool.
My father, a full colonel in the Air Force, decided that he wanted me to be the first.
Oh,
And
wow.
I think I was there on the dot when when West Point opened up to our class. So there you have it. That very first day was something else, just like it is for everyone
Yeah.
who enters the academy. And when my roommate, who was a prior service enlisted woman, showed me how to roll socks, I said out loud, "Boy, when I become a general, I'm going to fix that problem."
We're all so young and idealistic then. I tell you what, we're gonna fix. That's why I've always loved being around kids. I say kids, they're 19, 20 something year olds. Not only do they force you to stay young, even though they break your knees, but they just have so much energy because they're gonna change the world. They're gonna do it. It's gonna be great. So what led you to serve as an Army officer? I'm guessing it was a little bit of a family tradition.
Yes, like I said, my father was a 28-year veteran of the United States Air Force. He was a judge advocate general officer. So I grew up with a father who was a lawyer. And I learned how to write papers, I think, by third grade.
I bet.
So we come from a family tradition of military service. My uncle, Paul Cicchini, who is no longer with us, served in World War II as a translator because he spoke, of course, fluent Italian.
Yep.
My father came to the United States as an immigrant when he was 19 years old, soon after World War II ended.
Oh wow.
And he wanted to be an American. So we did not learn to speak Italian growing up. And he was very patriotic and served as an officer in the Air Force with great passion and also very humbly, very quietly.
Mm-hmm. And so your time at West Point, how was that? And that's not a large portion of this podcast, but I think I know I as a West Point graduate of 2004, I know I'm terribly curious, and I'm sure some of our other, especially women West Point graduates, be terribly curious. How was your experience there at West Point, being the first class of women allowed in?
Well, it was a good thing that I felt that being at the academy was my destiny.
Ah,
So, and to follow in the footsteps of my uncle and my father.
mm-hmm.
It was brutal.
Yeah,
You could say that for 4 entire years, myself and my female classmates endured the worst as
yeah,
far as a not so covert acceptance of us being there. And in so many little ways and actually great ways, we endured daily harassment, silencing, which
mm-hmm.
means that people didn't talk to us. We weren't included in group discussions, in academic collaborations,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. Very few women actually served in course club squad athletics.
Mm.
Those who did, I think, had a really rough. And I was a course squad athlete, which means I was a varsity athlete.
Yeah.
And I was one of the first sugar smacks,
What is that?
the women who served on the basketball team.
Oh, I've never heard this.
Yes, we were well, that should be in the bugle notes.
Should, I don't remember that. Either that or I forgot it already. One or the other. Or I never learned it because I never got quizzed on it, so I never had a pushing need for it.
But a cadet, first year cadet was often called a smack because
Mm,
we smacked ourselves against the wall
yeah,
whenever another classman came along down the hallway.
yeah.
And so, of course, we were the sugar smacks.
Mm.
And we made sure that the entire Corps of Cadets knew that there was one heck of a group of women out there playing their hearts out, blood, sweat, and tears.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is fantastic. So what did so, you know, brutal times through the 4 years at West Point. Then you commissioned in 1980. What did, the first 3 to 4 years of your Army experience, what did serving in uniform mean to you at that point in your life?
Well, that's an interesting question. I became, I would say, cynical at West
Mm,
Point because there seemed to be a double standard, and I suffered moral injury while I was there
mm,
because I was sexually attacked twice as a cadet, once in a full in a bus full of cadets who were all drunk from losing the Army-Navy game that year.
Oh my.
And then later on that same first year, I was attacked in my bed while I was asleep.
And nothing happened, of course.
There was no follow through or any kind of reporting measures
Yeah.
that were available at the time.
Mm.
If I had reported it, that would have been the end of my cadet career, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's a unpleasant but good transition to kind of the bigger topic of today's discussion, which is 1984. You were violently sexually assaulted, raped even, by a fellow officer, fellow captain, '03. How, and you reported that incident. Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit? What, not necessarily the details of obviously the event, but what happened after you reported?
What happened was I was going through a really nasty divorce.
Mm-hmm.
My former husband was extorting money from his officers and men
Oh my.
for a fake company, and he was eventually investigated with an Article 32 investigation and asked to leave with an other than honorable discharge.
Oh my.
So, with that behind me, I immediately changed my name from Anchor to Cicchini
Mm-hmm.
and moved on with my life. Soon after that, once I realized he was being kicked out of the Army, I decided to divorce him.
Mm-hmm.
At the time that happened, I had my second child,
Mm-hmm.
and he left the house when my baby was 9 days old.
Oh my gosh.
So it was a very vulnerable time, and my mother was there helping me with the new baby, and my older son was 1.5 years old. So she took the baby with her to Florida,
Mm-hmm.
and I processed a compassionate reassignment to Florida, to Patrick Air Force Base, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
During the time that I was alone with my 1.5-year-old son, I was raped. And this officer was part of the 2nd Armored Division in Fort Hood,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a signal officer. And he just appeared out of nowhere and befriended me, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a point in time where he entered my house without my permission
Mm-hmm.
and forced himself sexually against my will. So when that happened, I conceived a child.
Mm-hmm.
As the timing was, I reported to my new duty station at Patrick Air Force Base, not knowing I was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
It was a couple of weeks later that I found out.
You found out that you were pregnant.
Yes.
And had you reported the rape prior to leaving Fort Hood?
No, was in the I was in the process of going through a compassionate reassignment.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I wanted to do was jeopardize
Right.
that process.
And just so the audience has a little bit of more context. So this is the early 1980s, 1984 time frame. And for our younger audience that's listening in, or even our Gen X folks, the type of resources that service members have available today are certainly not available to Vidya when all of this was happening. The none of the resources, and I'm not even talking about what the command is supposed to provide, all of that. I'm talking about communication resources. Cell phones weren't there. Email was really kind of
Non-existent.
non-existent, right? So there was no, like, her mom, you said your mom was in Florida helping out with your first child. You
Second
had
child,
second child,
the baby.
right? You had your first child with you. The only way to communicate with your mom in Florida to get to Florida is via phone, which, if I recall at that time, was expensive.
A long distance phone call that
Long
you.
distance phone call or letters.
Mhm.
And everything to accomplish this compassionate reassignment, it wasn't done via computers. It wasn't done via, because those just weren't there.
Mhm.
And so Vidya is not only dealing with intense trauma plus a divorce and a contentious divorce and all of these situations, and also being probably one of, I would guess, on the entirety of Fort Hood, one of maybe 5% of military officer women on the entire post, if not less. And so you're almost entirely isolated. You're probably in some way, shape, or fashion ostracized by your unit. And so your whole idea is let me just go and move. And so now you arrive to Florida, you find out that the person who raped you got you pregnant. So can you kind of walk us through what happened after that?
Well, what I had to do was tell my commander.
Mm-hmm.
And my commander was Colonel Kenneth K. Dickinson, and he was an infantryman and airborne infantry. He was about 5'5" tall and smoked a cigar constantly, and every other word was a swear word.
Mm-hmm.
And he definitely had a small man complex, and he let everybody know it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the man that I had to stand at attention before his desk like a plebe and tell him that I had been raped and conceived a child from that rape.
And again, just for the context for our audience, why did you, what was it about being pregnant as a woman officer in 1984 that forced you to report this to your '06 commander?
Well, even today, women receive a change in profile when they become pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Not right away, because you can basically do everything you need to do, short of nuclear, biological, chemical defense training, where you're exposed to toxic chemicals. So it was important for my commander to know what my profile was at the time
Mm-hmm.
and how it would change over time.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, and I was there, and this is a little bit of a softball question. Was there, at that time, was there a bias against women service members being pregnant, having children?
Absolutely. I, of course, had already carried two children to term.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to say that in both cases, I worked until the very day that they were born.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, with my first child, I called an alert just before going to the hospital. And the night before, I had inspected all the arms rooms in our battalion, 9 months pregnant.
Wow.
So it was very important to do that to diffuse the bigotry
Yep.
and kind of like wearing a great big A on your forehead, like the scarlet letter of, except it was the scarlet letter P
Mm-hmm.
on your forehead. At the time, there was no maternity uniform for the field fatigues.
Really?
Yes, we called them BDUs back then,
Mm-hmm.
and they were just coming out. It was replacing the Vietnam era OD green uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
And I got around that by just buying bigger pants.
Wow.
And at one point, probably when I was about 6 or 7 months pregnant, my company commander said, "You look pregnant in that uniform."
You're like, thanks. Appreciate that. I am.
And he immediately took my platoon command away
What?
and sent me to become the assistant S3 at the battalion,
Mm.
where I wore Class A green uniform that had a maternity accommodation.
And you were probably the only person in the entire unit wearing Class A green uniforms.
Yes.
Of
Mhm.
course.
So that made me just stick out like a sore thumb even more.
Yeah.
And I did as much as I could to continue my duties as if they had never changed.
Right. So another thing to that story, you brought back a memory. When I was a second lieutenant in Korea, I was charged, one of my many additional duties was I was charged to do the monthly unit status report, USR. And I remember I was briefing my battalion commander at the time, and this is in 2005. And one of our soldiers, she had become pregnant. And I was briefing the battalion commander that our soldier become pregnant. In Korea at the time, military did not have medical facilities to manage this, so the soldier had to be sent back to stateside and another soldier sent forward to replace. And the commander, his response was, he and I'm sitting there and he's like, I wish the army would stop sending me all these goddamn women. They're hurting my readiness. And this is in 2005, so you can imagine what Vidya was dealing with in 1984. So then you had to report to your commander, you had to stand at attention, you had been raped, you're now with child from this rape. You have to inform Colonel Dickinson that you're with child and that you were raped. How did he respond?
Well, I mean, I could almost say word for word what he said is basically, what, you're fucking pregnant? You got fucking raped? What am I supposed to do with you now? So
Because it's your fault.
it was my fault that I got raped. It was my fault that I got pregnant. And my immediate supervisor, Major Jim Casey,
Mm-hmm.
said he was from the South somewhere. And he goes, I can't believe you got yourself knocked up. Why didn't you put a pill between your knees?
Oh my God. And just to remind our listeners, this man entered Vidya's house without her consent. So continuing on with your story, I'm sorry.
So there's also some background information that maybe also puts this more into context. It was, I think, in 1977 when the regulations changed that allowed women to stay in the military when they became pregnant.
Yep.
So we're talking only 7 years later. Here's a commander, two officers that were of that era when if a
Mm-hmm.
woman got pregnant, she had to leave the military.
Yep.
So there is a bias that we're talking about here. And Francesca and I were talking about regulations before we started our recording.
Mm-hmm.
And we both admitted that it's not common for an officer to sit down and just read regulations.
It's true.
It's just not done. So it's possible they didn't even know that the regulation had changed.
And now they're essentially looking at you as a liability to their numbers,
Yeah.
regardless of anything else that happened to you. You are a liability to them. So after their initial response, what sort of pressures did they start applying on you? Or did they, and I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, did they say, anything along the way of, hey, that's horrible. Let's figure out how to make this right. And let's figure out how to bring this perpetrator to justice. Can you kind of walk us through what were the steps that they took after their initial reaction of blaming you for being raped and then conceiving a child as a result of that rape?
They decided that the best thing for the good of the Army was for me to leave. So within a few days of me telling him, I was again at attention in front of his desk, this time with material already written down for signature to resign my commission as an officer.
How did you respond?
Well, I was certainly blindsided by that. I really, and I'm appreciating this now from some of the education that I have recently received. I went into fight or flight,
Mm-hmm.
and in my case, flight was freeze.
Yeah.
So I lost my voice. I literally lost my voice. I was so frightened and so surprised. So it was definitely a surprise attack, and purposely so. So he spent the better part of an hour convincing me why I should leave the Army.
This is Colonel Dickinson.
Colonel Dickinson, that I was pregnant, that I was not of no use, no longer of any use to be in the Army, and I could get a job as a civilian and I would do just fine.
Mm-hmm.
But he wanted me out of his Army.
Mm.
He fucking wanted me out of his fucking Army.
With the cigar in his mouth. And And so what happened after that meeting or during that meeting as a result of that meeting?
As a result of that meeting, he expedited my paperwork through
Mm-hmm.
his chain of command so that within a matter of days, they had approved his recommendation. During that time, I had gone on TDY. I continued my duties
Mm-hmm.
as prescribed. During that time, I realized that something seriously wrong had happened. What had happened with my father, he was very, very angry, and he assisted me with writing a withdrawal of my signature to resign my commission.
Because you were essentially forced to sign the paperwork.
Absolutely. I was forced to resign my commission with a threat. Quote, get an abortion and you can continue serving if you carry the baby to term. I will ruin your career and force you to resign involuntarily. Quote,
After being traumatized and everything else going on in your life and being told you're a piece of shit and a liability, you were forced to sign this paperwork. And so your father helps you file an appeal to withdraw, or essentially to withdraw your signature. And what happened after that?
it went through a slower process. It was not expedited as was the commander's paperwork. And
Yeah.
it went through an appeal process. There was an appeal board, I think, at two levels up, at the general officer level up in another state. Remember, we're an advisor detachment on an Air
Mm.
Force base where I was
Okay.
advising National Guard and reserve units on their ordnance mission.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Fort McPherson, okay, it
Mm-hmm.
went to Fort McPherson, and they had a board uh, that
Mm-hmm.
met that basically made a decision that I needed to leave the Army. They supported Colonel Dickinson's recommendation.
Were you allowed to be at this board?
No,
Were you allowed to have representation at this board?
no, I didn't even
Were you even allowed to provide matters to the board?
no, and I didn't even know a board was meeting to make the
Right.
decision.
And I just want to again for our audience, no cell phones, no email, none of that existed at this time frame. And long distance phone calls that cost a lot of money. For those of you who remember your parents yelling at you when you made some random phone call as a kid, not that my parents ever did that. My parents might have done that one or two times. So you weren't allowed to be at the board. You didn't know the board was happening. You weren't even probably offered to present matters at the board. Do you know whether or not your appeal to have your signature taken back, do you know whether even that was presented to the board?
It was a second
Mm-hmm.
board met. I
Okay.
actually appealed 3 times. And the other thing I did to advocate for myself was I went through the chain of command to see if I could branch transfer from
Mm-hmm.
ordnance to military intelligence, where I was better suited. I was trained as a cadet in Russian and Russian foreign affairs, and I was very good at it. But my grades were not high enough to be awarded military intelligence right out the gate.
Mm-hmm. And so your second appeal then was denied. During this time frame, did you file an IG complaint or EO complaints, or were you using those systems at that time, or did you file those after you were ultimately separated from the military, involuntarily separated from the military?
It was in November of 1984 that I received a denial of my second appeal. Immediately, I wrote a letter to the Secretary of Defense,
Mm-hmm.
essentially a third appeal, which inspired an Inspector General investigation. The Inspector General investigation was
Mm-hmm.
expedited and completed in 2 weeks, and my discharge was revoked. I received an order for discharge from the Army in December 1984, after the AIG investigation
Mm-hmm.
was completed and before my baby was born in February 1985. I then served in limbo to the end of my service obligation in June 1985. It's important to understand that Colonel Dickinson expedited my discharge so that it would happen while I was pregnant and before the baby was born. My appeals slowed down this process, similar to what happened to when I was a platoon leader. My job was taken away as an advisor, and I was made an administrative officer within the unit to where, again, my pregnancy greens, Class A greens. So,
And was there any regulatory requirement to do that, to remove you from your position?
no, there was not. There was no reason why I could not continue my job. Some of the units were pretty far away, and sometimes a small four-seater airplane was used to fly us out to, let's say, the Florida Panhandle. And Patrick Air Force Base is near Cocoa Beach and Melbourne, California. I mean, Florida on the east side of the east coast of Florida. So it was a pretty far drive up to the end of the Panhandle. And I was told by my doctor that it would be contraindicated to get into that airplane when I was very far along in my pregnancy. But that didn't mean I couldn't visit every other unit. I had 19 and only one unit was out on the Panhandle. The other thing was is that any pregnant soldier, even today, is not deployable. Well, there was no war at the time. Okay, we were in the Cold War. I'm a Cold War era veteran. So the idea of not being deployable was also moot. But in spite of that, he took me away from my duties and made me an administrative officer.
And so now you have this IG complaint. What happens with the IG complaint? What sort of investigation occurred? Was it a good investigation, flawed investigation? Can you kind of describe that a little bit?
So once I filed the IG complaint, Colonel Dickinson expedited it also. Within a couple of weeks, the IG was at my doorstep. And I was informed the day before the arrival of the IG that I could not get a lawyer. I could not talk to anyone.
What?
Yes, I was completely denied any rights of due process or even the time to prepare for the investigatory board of IG officers that showed up the following day.
Describe a little bit what you just now said. And I think there's a difference between how IG investigations were done then versus how they're done now. You just now said that a board of IG investigators or investigatory people showed up. Can you kind of describe what happened essentially during the interview,
Okay,
I'm
well, first
guessing?
of all, in the interview, there was no woman. Okay, it was three men.
Mm.
And I looked up the word kangaroo court, and this was
Yes.
definitely right along the lines of a kangaroo court. And I felt like I was Joan of Arc standing before the priestly magistrates with standing
hmm
alone. And again, it was extremely traumatic and very frightening with no preparation, no understanding what was really going on, and no representation. So,
Because you were denied
yes,
representation.
or preparation. So,
hmm
nor was I allowed to speak to anyone in the unit. So, I answered the questions as best as I could. And I remember just being really, really scared and trying to find my voice, but really probably at some point not even being able to answer the questions.
And so really this was not an interview, this was an
I would
interrogation.
say so, yes.
And what was the outcome of that? I won't even deem to say it investigation. What was the outcome of the interrogation?
I received a letter in May, 6 months later, unsubstantiating my claims from the Inspector General. During this time, I had had my baby and then served as a survivor assistance and administrative officer. A decision was made to revoke my discharge in December 1984 in order to allow me to serve my 5-year service obligation.
And the allegations that you had made included essentially that you were being railroaded, you were being discriminated against, the regulations were being misapplied, applied ways to you, but not to other people. Is that generally?
Yes, regulatory wise, there were some key takeaways. Colonel Dickinson was required by regulation to counsel me, and that counseling should have covered my career, the Army's investment in my development,
Mm-hmm.
satisfaction of service obligation, and opportunities within the U.S. Army Reserve. In addition, he was supposed to forward with his documentation an endorsement confirming that counseling had occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, he did say that counseling had occurred, yet he did not do anything of what I just said. So it's a very severe, what do you call it? He didn't follow the regulations, period.
He failed. He essentially had decided that you were a liability and he just needed to get rid of you as quickly as possible.
Right. Another regulation allows for withdrawal of my resignation any time before discharge. It's very, very clear with the endorsing authority's approval.
Mm-hmm.
So the endorsing authority would have been that general officer level board.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact is that I did withdraw my resignation at any time before discharge, yet that board disapproved my resignation. And then there were also pregnancy provisions that separation is no longer applicable if the pregnancy has been terminated.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that wasn't even considered at the time because the IG board met before I had had my baby.
Mm-hmm.
And something that we haven't talked about yet, I sought counseling
Mm-hmm.
with a marriage and family therapist while this was happening. And I was severely depressed and
Mm-hmm.
anxious and suicidal.
Yep.
And this man, his name was, he was a father. He was a Catholic chaplain
Mm-hmm.
and a major in the U.S. Army Reserve. He did not follow any sort of guidelines regarding reporting to through military medical channels that of my mental state.
Mm-hmm.
If he had done so, that would have also delayed processing me out of the Army.
And I think from reading your brief that, if I recall, he not only failed in those regulatory requirements, he also behaved unprofessionally with you.
Yes, this happened after I left the Army.
Mm-hmm.
I think he felt he unlimited boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
lack of boundaries once I was out of the Army, and he approached me sexually in the therapy setting.
To take advantage. So now you've been essentially your exit from the army involuntarily has been expedited. So what now that you've left the army, what was the personal and not left the army, now that you were forcibly separated from the army, what were the personal and professional impact of losing your career and your position due to these events, and not just the impact or the actions or inaction of your senior officers, but everything leading up to it that got you to that point.
Well, I want to add one more thing. Once that decision was made, I went into a kind of a limbo after the baby was born.
Mm-hmm.
They decided that they would let me stay in the Army until I had served my service obligation.
Mm.
So I went into a 4-month limbo, and it wasn't until actually one day after my service obligation ended that I was out processed the Army. So that out processing was purely administrative.
Mm-hmm.
It did not include any kind of counseling regarding VA service-connected disabilities, VA health services, and post-service employment to include serving in the reserves. Nor did I receive any kind of help finding a new job.
And going back a little bit, Was there ever an investigation initiated against the man that raped you?
No, it's that simple. It just wasn't considered and it wasn't initiated. And even though I had reported, nothing was done about it.
So we're now about 40 years later. What has driven you to come forward now? So you're one of our former service members that we're helping with Walk the Talk Foundation. And obviously, your advisor, Gina Cotton, one of our best, she talked to you, heard your case, was a little bit upset, as one would be. And you're one of her she's one of our Joan of Arcs, and she's helping a fellow Joan of Arc over here. So, and we're very honored to help you in any way that we can. So what really drove you to come forward now more than more than 40 years later?
Yes, it was 40 years, June the 30th of this year.
Mhm.
So, well, I've been living my life. I had gone through a year after I left the Army. I tried to commit suicide.
Mhm.
I've been through a lot of mental health therapies over the years, some other litigation efforts, and a lot of job changes as a
Mhm.
result of now a traumatic head injury and complex PTSD.
Mhm.
So I have an amazing West Point classmate by the name of Major Retired Kathleen Sylvia,
Mhm.
who's been a woman veteran advocate and state ambassador for the Military Women's Memorial for Pennsylvania since 2018. And she assured me in January of this year that there was something called the Army Board of Corrections of Military Records.
Yep.
It's something I had never heard of before, the ABCMR, that would review an application fairly, and I would have the opportunity to explain my case and ask for any kind of corrections to my military records, which, by the way, included a damning exit OER by Colonel Dickinson. So she has been instrumental in helping me organize a brief reviewing my personnel records and my medical records. And I wrote this past winter about a 200-page brief with her help.
Mhm.
And then through the West Point Women's Facebook site, I found out about dun,
Me.
dun, dun, the the Walk the Talk Foundation.
Yeah.
And really the rest is history.
Yeah. I think Dawn Paget linked us up, didn't she? My
Pardon
classmate.
me?
I think my classmate Dawn Paget linked us up, I believe.
Okay, I don't remember her name. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Dawn.
Hmm.
This coalition that we have has really helped me in even understanding that there was any other avenue for restitution.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, the way that you were forcibly separated by your command and the poor performance evaluation that you received on exiting, that negatively impacted your access to veterans health care. Is that part of the issue that we're working with here as well?
No, if anything, that damning OER prevented me probably, if I had wanted to enter the Army Reserve, from any kind of
Future service.
future service.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I didn't think I had the opportunity for future servants. That was the impression that I was given.
Because you were a piece of shit.
I was just a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Yep. So, it was here I am. I went to West Point to become an officer of integrity with the highest quality of education possible. I was taught to trust in the care and command of my superior officers. And if I did my job well, they would do theirs well too and protect me from harm whenever possible.
Hmm.
And I dedicated myself to giving my life and to and even the possibility of taking life for a righteous cause.
Hmm.
So it was a true betrayal of trust and a moral injury.
And that idea, specifically the moral injury piece, I know that there's several advocacy groups that are working advocating to Congress to force the VA to list moral injury as something that it can occur not just on the battlefield, but also in the cubicles. Because we see that out of as of yesterday, actually, 460 people, that service members currently serving and former service members that our foundation has helped, every single one of them, 100% of them, including myself, including Ryan, suffer from some level of moral injury from this betrayal of these leadership principles that we are told, we're believed. I joke, but not so jokingly. I always believed the lies that I was told, that we take care of each other, service before self, and all of these things. And then once you're in a difficult situation, you all of a sudden realize that not everyone who says those things actually believes them. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Army Board of Correction for Military Review. I wanted to Your case, as we were talking before we came on the show, I think is useful for our listeners to understand if they find themselves in a situation like what Vidya found herself in, or any other situation where you're on all of a sudden the wrong side of the desk with your leadership, or people in leadership positions, we'll say. It is difficult to fight, especially over years. So one of the things that our foundation's helping with, and also you said that your friend Kathleen helped with, is to fight, to present a case to the ABCMR. You have to argue that the military failed to follow the rules and regulations of the day. And so it can't be the rules and regulations of 2025. It has to be that the Army failed to follow the regulations of 1984, which means that you have to find the regulations of 1984 in order to craft that argument. So can you just, and it sounds silly, but it just is, and it takes time. So can you just kind of walk us through a little bit of how you, along with our advisor Gina, but I think actually mostly your friend Kathleen, how this is being accomplished in order to take this fight to the ABCMR?
Yes, so now I have a tool called the internet.
Yes.
And I began looking up regulations that would support my case. And lo and behold, there are about a half a dozen of them.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go, oh, I see, AR 600-120, all that I can find on internet is dated 1989. What do I do now?
Yep.
So then I began making a list of libraries across the Department of Defense, calling them one by one to see if they had these regulations. And Gina Cotton, Lieutenant Colonel retired Gina Cotton, did some legwork for me all over Washington, D.C., unsuccessfully, ironically.
Which is Washington, D.C.
So I found at the Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle Barracks that they had these regs on the shelf. Now the trick was, here I am way over in Arizona. How do I get these regs? Well, I thought of hiring someone. I thought of asking Gina to take the train from Washington, D.C. to Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania. And then Kathleen Sylvia popped up. And without even me asking, she showed up one day with the camera on her smartphone and took 108 photos of the applicable regulations.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's old-fashioned detective work there.
That's amazing. That's just, I actually have goosebumps right now. That's so awesome. So thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Kathleen Sylvia, for all that you're doing for America and its citizens. And thank you, Carlisle Barracks, for actually having that stuff on record. So beyond your personal case, what changes do you believe the Army and the Veterans Affairs Administration still need to make to support military sexual trauma survivors? And that military sexual trauma, for those of you who listening who might not know what that means, that includes sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. So the whole continuum of military sexual trauma.
Well, I know a lot has changed over the years, that there are avenues and there are processes in place for men and women who are sexually assaulted in the military. I think that a lot more has to be done. And really, it's a leadership problem. Bottom line,
Agreed.
it's leadership.
Yep.
We actually have a regulation, 600-100, that's called the Army Professional Leadership Policy. And it is eloquently states in great detail what a leader is and who a leader should be and how a leader should conduct themselves. And I've always been an idealist, and I think that we just need to follow the reg. It's really that simple. And we need an inspector general system that actually works.
Amen.
And I know you've talked about that ad infinitum in many other podcasts.
Amen. Well, we will continue to talk then. I appreciate you saying that as something, as an add-on to, yes, we need an inspector general system that actually works, because when you have your command teams or your leadership teams or whoever, the regulation is, as you know, it's words on paper or words on a computer. That's all it is. And until you have a commander that actually reads the regulations, follows the regulations, it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, because everything that happened to you was against regulations. But if the IG is not going to do what they're supposed to do to actually manage the system and report on the system if there's things going wrong, if the command is refusing to follow the regulation, it just doesn't matter. And that's it, and it's absolutely appalling. Kind of expanding out a little bit more past the Army, past the VA, if Congress or the public could take away one message from your story, what would it be? Or multiple messages?
Well, if I were to sit down and talk with Senator Mark Kelly or Senator Ruben Gallego, I hope that I do, actually. I hope that I can talk to them face to face. They are two men that are champions for veterans and for military service. And it really is about integrity and holding true duty, honor, and country, and not duty, honor, me. And I also hold true the cadet prayer. I don't know if you would like me to say that. I would. I just love the cadet prayer.
I actually think that would be a wonderful closing. I will turn it over to you, ma'am.
Strengthen and increase our admiration for honest dealing and clean thinking, and suffer not our hatred of hypocrisy and pretense ever to diminish. Encourage us in our endeavor to live above the common level of life. Make us to choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong, and never to be content with a half-truth when the whole can be won. Endow us with courage that is born of loyalty to all that is noble and worthy, that scorns to compromise with vice and injustice, and knows no fear when truth and right are in jeopardy.
Joan of Arc. If our listeners don't have goosebumps, I don't know. You're just not a human being. I'm actually tearing up a little bit over here. That's wonderful. Karen, I really appreciate it. This has been a true honor and a privilege to have you on our show. And just one more plug, because I don't think I covered this quite well enough or clearly enough for our listeners. No matter where you are, if you are experiencing some sort of injustice, pull the regulations that exist for the time that you're experiencing that injustice, because you don't know, you might not have the time or the inclination to fight back now, but it's 40 freaking years later and this lady is fighting. And I love it. I'm here for it. It's wonderful. Karen, over to you for any closing last words.
I'm voicing my story to empower myself and others. It is my way of speaking face to face with my perpetrators. My hope is that I will receive generous restitution and that I can inspire change in administrative procedures and command and inspector general integrity through congressional laws at the highest levels of the military and Coast Guard.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being a guest on our show. It's truly an honor.
Thank you for having me. It was a privilege.
Well, that's it for this week's topic. We really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out our foundation website at walkthetalkfoundation.org.
And feel free to reach out and give us feedback. You can get a hold of us via Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and our foundation's website. Details in the description section. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next episode.